Hello, welcome back to Test Those Breasts podcast. Today I have John Chao with me to interview me about who I am as a person. Sometimes when we get cancer or any other kind of illness, that becomes your identity for a while, and we kind of forget who the person is behind that cancer because cancer isn't all of who I am. And John is going to have a conversation with me about who I was before cancer and, who I am now. So welcome, John.
Thanks for having me back. It was really good to be there. Last episode where you shared about your story of discovering your cancer and also everything that you went through. But as you mentioned, we've known each other now for a little bit over 2 years. And I know you as this wonderful, caring, mentoring, bubbly personality. So I think it'd be really fun for everybody who's listening to go all the way back and find out a little bit about who you were when you were little and what kind of, maybe what your childhood was like. Who are you? Were you always this kind of a warm, friendly person as a kid?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
John, I had such a wonderful childhood. My father is still with me. He is 82 years old and just plugging away. My mother passed away in October of 2019 and my whole life changed. I think about my childhood a lot, and I had very nurturing parents who were busy all the time. They worked, they had an amazing social life, and which we had an amazing social life. We did it all. We went camping. We went on trips. We were very privileged. I did not grow up in a wealthy family, but we were very privileged kids. We went to good schools, and there's so much nostalgia in my childhood, not really any trauma per se. And so everything was just really great in our family. And so I can't really say anything bad about my childhood. I was always happy. I have 2 brothers. I'm the middle child, and I just had such a wonderful childhood, and I was always an extrovert. I had lots of friends. I had a lot of emotions. I had a lot of intuition. I realized that really when I was in high school. I didn't understand it at that time. I understand it a lot more as an adult, but I had a lot of intuition of how our world would be now. And I actually decided when I was in high school that I didn't want to have my own children. I didn't want to bear any children. And boy, did I catch a lot of flack for that from all kinds of people, except for my parents. My parents never, ever made me feel like I was missing out on anything or, oh my gosh, you have to have kids and things like that. They were the only people really who actually were okay with that, and they didn't make me feel bad. My parents let us do a lot of things when we were kids because they wanted us to experience different perspectives. They wanted us to experience, like if I wanted to go to church with my friend, they let me go. I grew up in a Jewish and a Methodist family, so we celebrated everything. We celebrated Christmas, Hanukkah, Passover, Easter, the whole 9 yards, because my mom and dad really wanted us to experience all those things. And they didn't care if we decided not to be religious and follow any kind of religion, but they did want us to be able to be open enough to see what was out there. And so I just had a lot of really good experiences as a child.
That's beautiful. And This is my first time hearing all of this. And now everything makes so much sense of who you are, how you operate. We'll get into a little bit what you did as a profession, but why you're so good with children, why you have been and are still a really good mentor, all of these things, even how you spoke about your mother in the last episode and who she is as a person, who your dad is, how they have raised you. It makes total sense now why you are who you are today. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. What did you always know that you were going to move into this direction professionally when you were little? Did you care for that when you were younger? What did you study in college?
You know, it really is funny now that I think about that. When we were kids, when I was in elementary school, I had some really good friends down the street. One was my very best friend. And I used to bring my Barbies down to her house, and she had a younger sister. We all are in touch even today. And we used to play school. Like we used to set up a desk. Well, because my best friend's mom was a teacher. And so I don't know if that's where it came from, but we used to play school. So sometimes I was the student and sometimes I was the teacher. But did I think that I wanted to be a teacher when I was younger like that? Maybe, but I don't remember. Like I wasn't so obsessed with something like some girls, well, even boys, are obsessed with becoming a veterinarian. That was not me. I didn't know what I wanted to be, honestly. When I got out of high school, I went to airline school, and I just thought, because when I was in high school, I really didn't have those options, the options that kids have today. There are some schools where you go into the school. I worked at one of these schools where you go into the school and there are these different academies, whether it be culinary or engineering or medical or whatever. And you kind of go in the direction that interests you the most, and then you can work on college credits and internships and everything in high school. I didn't have that, and I wish I had, but I kind of had to wade my way through and try different things to finally figure out what I wanted to do. So I went to airline school right out of high school and worked for the airlines for a while. I lived in Washington State and Colorado. And then I came back to Reno. So when I came back, I was a travel agent for a while. And I thought, okay, this is going to be my new gig. Like I'm going to be a travel agent. This is what I'm going to do for a living. But then I had this kind of thought in my mind that I really liked advertising and marketing type stuff. And mainly it's because of a boyfriend that I had at that time who was in marketing. And I thought, God, that's just so fascinating to me. So I started going to college at that point and working on a marketing and advertising degree. And I worked for an advertising agency, which was really, really fascinating and really loved that. And then I went and worked for a law firm. So I've been kind of a jack of all trades, worked for a law firm. So I've been working since I was 14 years old. I started at McDonald's. I always say I worked my way up the food chain because literally I worked at McDonald's, and then I worked at Burger King, then I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken. I've just done so many different things. And I was trying to find my way. But when I was in my, I would say, late 20s to early 30s, I was like, okay, I got to do something here. I need to figure out what the heck I want to do with my life. That's when I was going to go into psychology. But then I ended up going into teaching. That's how I got into teaching, really, honestly. And that's where I met my husband in 2002.
Beautiful. Yeah. I see in my own experience, some teachers who've had more limited life experience and how they're a little bit more of a black and white, straight shooter kind of person. Whereas I can really tell now why so many different kinds of kids have had affinity or even have pushed you away at one point, but you've been able to interact with so many different kinds of people because of your vast array of life experience. And that's just really wonderful. Even though you're a straight shooter and you do what's best for people, you understand because you've had so much more life experience. Yes. I didn't know that either. That's wonderful.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I ended up being so good with teaching and kids, because I understand the different passions, and I really learned everybody comes from such a different type of childhood. And then not everyone had the privileged childhood that I had, where I was allowed to try different things and I had nurturing parents. Not all of my students had nurturing parents. Some kids lived in motels. And I just wanted to help students, not just by teaching them social studies or English, but to really help them find their passion in life and be able to make those connections to real life. Because when I was in school, we didn't have that. Everything was on its different island. You go to English class. I didn't know how that ever connected to social studies or how math and science connected. I didn't know any of those things. Today,
correct,
I do. And I help kids make those connections and that helps them love to learn social studies more, or helps them to learn to love math more. Or so I was more wanting my kids to find the passion and to understand why it was that they were learning what they were learning in school.
Man, I wish I had you as a teacher. That would have been really good. You touched on meeting your husband around 2002. I would love to find out from you how you met your husband, because even though this is a podcast about your experience with breast cancer, we mentioned in the last episode that he was integral in being a part of you when you had called and said that you didn't feel any lumps. He encouraged you, and also he's been a really great caregiver. So he's played a really big role in this journey of yours as well. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that later on in the podcast, but I'd love to find out how the two of you met.
Yeah, he has been wonderful. And I never thought that I would ever find anyone who would hang with me for the rest of my life. When I met my husband, we actually met about a year and a half prior. I was in my first education class, and he remembered me. I was doing my student teaching in 2002, and we were in the same department, and we were in this meeting, and we walked out of the meeting, and I said, "Hey, you look really familiar to me." And he goes, "Yes." He says, "Agnes Damon's class at Worcester High School," because some of the college classes were held in classrooms at the high schools. And he remembered me from being in that class with him prior. I was doing my student teaching. He was in his first year of teaching, and we just sort of became friends. We would come and visit each other at each other's classrooms. And I just remember the first time I was sitting in his classroom and we were talking about stuff, and I just realized, I really like this guy. I really like this guy. So we were pretty flirtatious for the rest of the semester. And at the end of the semester, I ended up inviting him to my end of my student teaching celebration. And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "I'll be there." Well, he never showed up.
No, I did not expect
And I was like, oh my God, I was so bummed because I really wanted to see him. About a week later, he sends me an email, and I was substitute teaching at another school. And he said, "I am so sorry that I did not show up. My babysitter fell through. She totally fell through." And he said, "Would you like to go out on a date?" And so that Friday we went on a date. And we've been pretty much inseparable ever since. It turned out that his babysitter was someone in his family who didn't show up. And he was bummed too. But we had the best first date. We knew very quickly that we were pretty in tune with each other.
I love it, because this is really a partnership. And it seems like from the get-go, it felt very much like a partnership, and it's continued on as a partnership throughout everything that you've been going through in your cancer story as well.
Yes, and he has 3 kids, so they call me bonus mom. The kids were, I think one was 4 going on 5, one was 6 going on 7, and one was 10. So they're all in their late 20s to early 30s now, and we have a really good relationship. I absolutely adore my stepkids, but I call them my daughters and my son, and just really amazing human beings. When I first found out I had cancer, I was pretty upset, and then I said, "You didn't sign up for this." And then he goes, "Yes, I did."
Oh.
And I said, "Yeah, you're right. You did." Because, through sickness and in health and things like that, it didn't process to me that would be me, him taking care of me, so.
Correct. Yeah. And I know that not everybody listening to this podcast has a life partner per se, but I do think it is really good that when we are going through something hard, we tend to pull away from our loved ones, just like how you said you didn't sign up for this, as a pulling away. But it was so wonderful for him to have pulled you in and say, "Yes, I did." So for anybody who's listening, who your loved one is going through a hard time, be like Jamie's husband and pull them in, because I think that's what they need the most at that time. Speaking of people who have pulled you in, you mentioned in the last episode about your mother and what a wonderful person she was, and how you spoke about her in such a wonderful way. Can you tell us more about that, and then just her passing and how that impacted you?
So, in hindsight, I really believe that losing my mother. I was incredibly close to her. We were just really close. She was very nurturing all my life. So when she died in October of 2019, my life took a tailspin. It changed me dramatically, like a limb fell off. And my heart was so broken. I had a very difficult time. We had to go through the pandemic because this was right before the pandemic. And I was grieving hardcore. And I really feel like my breast cancer was a product, or I don't know if you'd call it a product. I think it happened because of the crazy trauma and grief and stress that I had gone through starting from when she died. About a year later, on Christmas 2020, my father-in-law passed away. My husband's stepfather, we were very close to, died of COVID in the hospital. We couldn't see him at that time. They were allowed to have one person. So my mother-in-law was in there. Less than a year later, in October of 2021, my other father-in-law passed away. So we had 3 major family members pass away within, a couple of years, like just in that couple of years. That was rough. I think I aged like 20 years, I felt like I did. And it was very stressful. But I still talk to my mother. I have her ashes. I have a plan to do something with them.
Beautiful.
But I do reach out to her. I see her. I had dreams with her. I have significant numeric numbers that pop up on my phone all the time. One is my birthday, October 16. So I see 1016 all the time, which I had been seeing before she died for years. But then it got more and more frequent leading up to her death, which was so weird. I even saw it on her phone the morning she died. So, but now I see 1006. So I see 1016 and 1006. 1006 is October 6th is when she died. So I see those on my phone all the time. So in my mind, she's visiting me.
Yes.
So she's still with me. Yeah. So that stress and trauma, I don't believe it was anything I ate that gave me cancer. I did have somebody tell me that I ate too much soy, which turned out to be complete nonsense. The whole soy thing has been debunked a million times. And so I know that wasn't true. I really feel that the stress and trauma of losing parents, going through a pandemic, the school system, I don't know if you've been watching in the United States, what's going on with teachers and schools and things like that. Very, very stressful. Leading up to my retirement, I really feel that all of that created this perfect storm. As my therapist friend in Australia, Eddie, would say, it created this perfect storm for cancer to strike my breast.
Mm-hmm. It's the compounding effect. If you had gone through all those things separately and maybe a little bit more scattered, then it may not have had such a strong impact. And so I think it's so important for people to also be very aware of what they're going through and be open to the amount of impact that it can have on them versus just trying to put your head down and shoulder to the plow and ignore what they have gone through or ignore processing the feelings of what they're going through.
Yes, for sure. Mm-hmm. And I've always been a very busy person. I think I get that out of my parents. They've always had something on the social calendar, always. So I have always had at least 2 jobs for many, many years, at least 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I've always had a business on the side. I've always had a very busy social life. So my calendar has been packed for a long, long time. Yep. And I think sometimes we get ourselves so busy that we don't know how to say no to things. Now, being a 55-year-old woman now that's been through breast cancer, I'm very good at saying no. I'm very good at boundaries. I will put up those boundaries, and not everybody likes those boundaries. No. But there are certain people that I have had to separate myself from, and not because I don't love them or like them or anything like that. there are just certain things that I recognize that might be causing some things in my life that I just can't have. I just can't.
Right.
And so boundaries and saying no. One of those boundaries and saying no pieces is you just can't do it all.
Yes.
You've got to take some things off of your calendar, because if we are so busy and so stressed and trying to, you become forgetful almost too.
Sure.
And that's pretty scary in itself. And I was kind of getting to that point where I was forgetting things. And I realized that I was overflowing with too many things to do.
Well, it's very likely that our human body was not made for this modern busy world, and that our nervous system was not made for that. If we even just look back at, I don't know, 100 years ago or 50 years ago, people lived lives that were much slower, very different. They weren't on all the time. They weren't reachable all the time. And it just seems like we are pinged every single moment. And that response, it affects the nervous system in a certain way.
Right. I don't know how it is in Canada, but I know in some other countries when a mother, somebody that's super important in your family dies, like a mother or father.
Bereavement.
Yeah. Like some countries, you take like 6 months to a year off or something like that. That's what I've heard. But here in the United States, there are some people who don't have any bereavement. Some have maybe like 2 or 3 days. In the school district, I had 10 days. And come to think about it, 10 days? 10 days. How do you go back to work after 10 days? How do you go back to work after 3 days or 2 days?
Sure. Exactly.
And so, people think that, oh yeah, so it's just, people die and then you just get back on the horse and go. And that's just, it's tragic, actually.
Agreed. Yeah. Not something that is beneficial for the person or even for the employer as well. You mentioned retirement earlier. I want to get into that a little bit, because you obviously worked very hard leading up to that. You're very excited about joining your husband in retirement. And so I wanted to ask you about what your original plans were for retirement and how they have shifted after your cancer experience and what you're more leaning into now with retirement.
Yeah. So when I found out that I had cancer, all of our plans had changed, but we did make sure that we kept camping in that plan, because we're big campers. We love camping. So during this last year, when I was going through treatment, we did have to cancel some trips. We had to cancel our trip to Hawaii and a couple of other things. And we did finally end up going to Hawaii just a couple of months ago, which is great. But my treatments, my chemo treatments were every 3 weeks. So in the third week of the treatment, that's when I was actually feeling a lot better. So we would take that third week and we would go camping. And since we're retired, we could go midweek. And so it was easy to go and there weren't a lot of people. And that's just kind of what we made our lives. So my husband pretty much kept pretty busy. He, has activities. He's a bike rider. Now he's a motorcycle rider. Yay. Because you don't want to freak your wife out or anything, but
yeah, right.
Yeah, he decided to get a motorcycle right in the middle of my treatments. And I'm like, why couldn't you wait until after? And we were planning on going to New Orleans several times when COVID started, and we had to push that off. And we never did make it to New Orleans until I had my breast surgery, because I ended up going to the Center for Restorative Breast Surgery to have the autologous surgery, where they take the tissue they took it from my abdomen and rebuilt my breasts. And it was pretty fascinating. It was like, imagine that. This is how we get to New Orleans. Cause I'd never been to New Orleans, and I was so excited, and we had to push it off several times because of COVID. And there we are, going to New Orleans to get my breast surgery. So that was really fun. We made a nice trip out of it. Now we are definitely camping. Like right now, I'm at my uncle's house in Tehachapi. We are visiting him, and then we're going to do some camping going back to Reno. We have lots of plans. We're going to Greece next year with our kids. We are going to, we were going to go on a cruise, but we canceled that because my immune system is pretty low right now because I'm on some meds for this other anemia issue. I'm dealing with something else right now, which I'll get into later, but we're planning trips.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that there's so much time in nature as well because there's a very healing environment. So overall, it seems like you haven't allowed your life to be stopped. And
No.
it's so good to see that this is the mentality that you really brought into your life of being active and sharing life with people. And, I think also your ability to have strict boundaries now allow for you to have a really enjoyable life, which makes
Yeah.
a really big difference.
I was going to say, I want to make it really clear too. I did not envision my life being the way it is right now. Like I didn't envision me being happy and healthy again. One of the things that really that actually came up in our therapist session, my husband and I go to therapy, was that in February, because I'm still dealing with this anemia thing, I really felt like I had no significance. I did not feel like I had a purpose or any significance. And that is not something that I was experiencing before cancer. I had so many things going on. I had a podcast. I was putting a coaching business together to help struggling teachers and pre-service teachers. So I had so many things going on. And on June 11th, it just stopped. It stopped completely. So fast forward to February, just this past February, I had the realization that I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have any significance. I really felt like I was nothing. Like, what am I going to do with my life? That is where this podcast was born. And because now I do have a purpose, I want to help people, even survivors, because we're not over it. I'm still healing. And there are, people don't just get over cancer and move. I mean, there's so much that goes into it, but I want to help people who have not gotten cancer yet, who are going through cancer, all the phases, just like people helped me. And anyway, so I just wanted to put that in there, that things change, when you have a diagnosis like that, your whole entire perspective and your whole perspective just changes.
Yes. Yeah. And let's get into that. I think that's a really good way to wrap up this episode. You have very clearly been able to be a very experienced teacher, and you've used that as a way to mentor other teachers who are up and coming. And that kind of personality trait of yours, this warm and caring, has done so many people so much good in the teaching world. And here you are also on this episode talking about the importance of boundaries and everything that you've learned through your cancer experience. And I see a very smooth transition from you being a mentor to teachers, because that was the field that you were in, to now you just also sharing, having significance and being able to support other women who are going or even have gone through breast cancer. Tell us a little bit more about that, how that feels to you, the natural progression of the transition.
Yeah, I've always had a passion to listen and help people through some struggles, whether it be a teacher in the classroom, a pre-service teacher, a struggling teacher. Because of my experience with being a teacher and a mentor, I've been coaching and mentoring teachers for, 10, 15 years. I feel like this is such a natural progression of going through breast cancer, because 1 in 8 women in their lifetime are going to get breast cancer. And I know how scary it is. And I want to be able to be someone who can give those people the space to feel it all and to, help try to get them to process better. And I just feel like this is such a natural fit for me. I'm a woman. I am a thriver. I'm a survivor and a thriver. And will something else come my way someday? Maybe. probably, and I want to be able to have that help for me, and I want to be able to lend that help to other people. And so that's why I really want to be able to offer coaching to any woman out there, or even like caregivers. Caregivers are a huge part of this. As I was talking about with my husband, this wasn't just me going through breast cancer. This was my husband too. And it is not easy. And the communication needs to be there. So I would like to be able to help couples as well. I am not a licensed therapist at all, but I do feel that I have the experience, and I'm still going through that experience. My husband and I are going to marriage therapy because there are so many things that I needed to learn, and there were so many things that he needed to learn. So I feel like I can help people get through the different phases, because there's a lot of different phases of this diagnosis.
For sure. And I think in the same way that we don't require teachers who have more experience to have a certain accreditation in order to mentor younger teachers, or we don't ask a lot of people in a lot of industries who have a ton of experience to get a certain certificate or whatnot in order to mentor or coach people. In the same way in life, you've gone through so much, and you personally sought so much support, probably much more than other people, because you're just very thorough with what you do, that I can see the translation of you having so many teachers who are grateful for your support. That will translate into so many women being very grateful for your support as well, which is just huge.
Thank you, John. I have had a lot of people reach out to me privately or even in person if I bump into them in public or whatever, and tell me, thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing the good, the bad, the ugly. They say it's helped me and my perspective on what kind of things, you know, to say and what not to say. It's helped me understand more of what my mom went through or whatever, just for a variety of different reasons that people have said, thank you. Because one day if I get breast cancer, I feel like you have helped me understand what I might be going through. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a good purpose and significance in a person's life. If I can help even one person get through this, like people have helped me get through it, my heart will be very, very happy.
Well, everyone who's listening right now, Jamie is very humble. She didn't talk a lot about what she did in the education world, where she's had multiple students come back to her and say, I didn't like you at the time because you, were really strict, or but because Jamie had their best interest in mind, she cared for them in a certain way. And they came back when they were older and said that you were the best teacher that they ever had. And so, there are just so many people that I know of who have experienced you and how you transformed their life, that I am very confident that going forward in this direction, you're going to change a lot of the lives of women, whether they're going through breast cancer, or whether they have people in their lives who are going through breast cancer, or many men who may listen to this podcast and receive support from you as well. You are just a really wonderful person, and I'm so glad that your story is not just one of cancer, but your story is one of who you are. And you've gone through multiple lives, it felt like, before retirement. And it seems like now after retirement, you're also going to go through multiple lives and also help multiple lives. I'm so glad that we got to talk about your story today.
Me too. Yeah. Lots of reinventing myself many times. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate your interviewing with me today.
My pleasure. And everyone stay tuned. There's going to be so many great episodes coming up with people with a lot of experience, with a lot of professionals, and even with somebody who was able to help Jamie go through her experience as well. So this is not going to be a podcast that you're going to want to miss.